About functions. One is that type conversion can take place when you're passing and receiving values. Here we could set the num variable to be of a character variable type and leave everything else the same. Now it can still be passed to a function that's receiving it as an integer because Genero will handle that sort of compatible type conversion for you. Now when we run the program we get the same result, but we'll see that the 6 is actually left justified because it is stored as a character variable when it's displayed. Another item to note is that you can let a variable equal the value to the call to the function. So here, instead of calling hello, let's set the num variable equal to the result of the call to the hello function. So we specify let num equal and the hello function. We keep everything else the same and we'll get the same result as we had with calling the function and returning num back. So let's compile and display or execute that, and we see it's the same. Now you can also return true or false without having to have a returning clause when you call the function. So let's add another little function called trueTest, and all we're going to have in this function is simply the statement to return true. So when this function is called, it returns true back to the calling function. Now in our main, instead of calling trueTest, let's instead check to see if trueTest is in fact true. So we can either specify equals true, or we could put the whole function name and its parens in an overall parentheses to evaluate to true. So if trueTest returns true, then we're going to just display our num value. Otherwise, we're going to display false. Now notice that the keyword return and true in the trueTest function is all that we have there. And we'll go ahead and compile that and run it. And we see there that we get our same results, hello great world 5, and then our number which returned was 6. Now just to illustrate further, let's change the return to false. So again, just this Boolean value returned with the constant true or false can be used and can be helpful when evaluating something in a function and having it return true or false. And you can see here this time it returned false. When you're passing values to a function or returning values from a function, you're using what's called the Fgl Stack. When you call a function, parameters are pushed to the stack. Before the function code executes, parameters are popped from the stack in the local variables defined in the function. When a function returns values, data is pushed on the stack and popped into variables specified in the returning clause. Now you might also have a situation where you are passing by reference and not by value. So in our standard data types we saw we're passing by reference, but if we were to define an array, a dynamic array, one of the built-in class objects, or a Java interface object, or a byte or a text variable value, we would be passing by reference. So the way in which the Fgl stack is used is passing the value by reference, not by value. Now let's take a look at functions used in an overall completed program and see the various ways that we call functions and pass values between them. So here's a little orders program we just pulled up. You can see it's just a standard program with some functionality to retrieve and add and find and delete various orders and things from stores. So if we look at that code, we'll see a variety of functions defined, each managing a different task in the overall program. So if we open up the orders4gl program, I'm going to look over here on the right and see that all the functions in Studio are all listed in alphabetical order, and I'm just going to pull up the main, which of course is where the type of function that would be where the program would begin, and I see a call, a standard call to a function. Notice we're not passing any values to it. It's just a call to a function called ORD items dialog. So let's go ahead and take a look at that function. And we see that that function has a variety of different function calls within it. So while this function is executed, we see here that depending on what the user chooses to do, different functions will be called. Here we see one, if not order new, then. So in other words, if the result of the call to order new is not true, then we're going to exit the program. Here's an example of passing by reference. We're passing a reference of the dialog that we're in if the user chooses save, and calling the order update function with that reference to the dialog that we're in. Another example would be, as we saw earlier, setting a variable equal to a value that includes a function call. Now this one actually includes the result of a method on the dialog object itself, and there's more information on objects and methods later in this video series. Here's another one passing the current position, or the curpa value, and another example of letting a variable equal the result of the function. So in this example, let's look at what display stock list returns. So if we look at the bottom of the display stock list function, we see that it returns a variable, a value, returning a value of retnum, or return number. If we go back to where we called that function, we can see that that value is then populated into our ID variable, and our ID variable is used throughout this function when the user chooses to chooses the zoom action, which is to pop up a filter and look for the stock number that they're looking for. So in that example, you see the result of a call to a function to get the ID, then the ID variable is used in the rest of this block of code.